there's a player feedback loop where they get to see that they're supporting their favorite creator and they get thanked on stream or wherever it might be. That gets them to spend more and spend more often. Basically, all of the metrics that we see is that you want as many players as possible interacting with the creator program because it's the highest return you can possibly have.
Welcome to Games Growth with Upptic, a podcast about the discipline of scaling digital games. We speak with industry experts and investigate trends to highlight the strategies, technology, and tactical methodologies to profitably grow your game to massive global audiences. If you're interested in learning more, visit us at upptic.com. My name is Andrew Agosta, Director of Marketing here at Upptic, and joining me today is my guest,
Justin Sachs, CEO at Nexus.gg.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Justin. This is a very monumentous moment for the podcast. In the approximately 1.5 to 2 years that we've been recording this podcast, we've never done an episode without Warren Woodward, our CGO. And so congratulations, everyone. You made it. We've transcended. We are now a post-Warren Woodward podcast. Just joking. Warren's on vacation. He'll be back next week, so don't miss him too much. But we have a really interesting guest with Justin. We're going to talk about something that's a little bit deeper funnel than what we usually focus on. Obviously, the Games Growth podcast, we focus very heavily on UA and top of funnel growth. Justin has founded a really interesting company with a really interesting technology to capitalize on a very interesting trend, which we'll talk about. And so let's just jump right in. Justin, can you give us a little bit of background about who you are, what your personal background is, and what is the journey that led you to founding Nexus?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. So my background, I've been in games my whole career, about 15 years. I started out as a competitive player before esports was a word, much less an industry. My timing was not great. And then I was a content creator. This is pre-Twitch, so made videos, wrote blogs, that sort of things. But always I focused on competitive PC games. Now my life has gotten more in console and mobile, but when I was at college, I built a coaching website for League of Legends, which at the time was the biggest online PC game. And then I joined a media startup out of school called Curse, which owned and operated a bunch of websites, communities, platforms focused on PC games. I joined when they were like 30 people. Curse grew to a few hundred folks, eventually was acquired by Twitch in 2016. At the time, I was running biz dev for the media side of the business. And during that transition, I left to start building Nexus.
So we'll talk about what Nexus is in just a moment. Your background in content creation is obviously the genesis for, I think, your idea of why Nexus should exist. But I want to take a step back and talk about what is the current state of the industry from your perspective? I mean, you've claimed as a player, you're now a CEO and founder. You've been in the games for a while. Can you talk about where you see this moment in time for games overall?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on one specific piece, which is discovery. So how do players find the games that they will fall in love with and get excited about? And then what keeps them retained, what keeps them interested and excited? And I think like the way that I think of the history of distribution, I mean, very early on in shareware, it was physical based and word of mouth and like you put a floppy disk into a computer. But really like where gaming significantly grew was still physical distribution, but it was big box retailers. And
Right.
So the publishers that won were the best at literal logistic distribution. And so EA was particularly successful because they were able to put more units on shelves.
Right.
And then what started driving discovery was news and reviews. And so there was magazines and then there was IGN and GameSpot. And if your game got a 95 out of 100 or a 9 out of 10, you would sell millions of units. And so news and reviews and editorial was really, really important. But now probably about 5 years ago, there's been a new shift. And what I think is one of, if not the most impactful driver of players learning about games, but also staying engaged with games, is the personalities that they follow. And these can be YouTubers or streamers on Twitch or TikTokers or a Discord server that's a community that you're a part of. But that's really how players are excited about, learn about games and decide to engage with them.
Right. Totally agree. I think, from my perspective, it is a little bit varied by medium, at least from my generation. I'm a millennial, so I'm not quite like on my phone all the time. I still do quite a bit of PC gaming. But, from my perspective, I get a lot of my PC games through Steam still. And, the reviews, the medium of the reviews have shifted, right? They're in Steam as opposed to in a magazine. I don't go to IGN, but the Discover feed does quite a bit. The other obvious place, and we've talked to quite a few folks, especially the folks at GameSite recently, who talked about how influencer is a huge, huge lever for PC games. And that makes a ton of sense. And then on the mobile side, we're obviously biased. We think UA is still great. Traditional UA, paid media is really great for mobile, but it's really interesting to see how the creative programs and stuff that you're describing has a genesis in PC, is able to be leveraged really meaningfully there, and then how it is now breaking out into mobile as well. So we're going to talk about a creative program. That's what sort of Nexus is. And let's zoom all the way back and say, first of all, what is a creative program and why do people care about it?
Yeah, well, the first thing is actually definitions, and there's really two definitions to talk about. One, I use the word creator interchangeably with influencer.
Right.
Really what I mean is someone with an audience. And the reason for that is, frankly, creators don't like being called influencers. And so I try to keep that out of my vocabulary as much as I can. And really the thing to define here is what is a creator program. And frankly, it is not a agreed upon term in the industry. It's something I'd like to define. And frankly, like we have a pretty vested interest in a specific piece of what a creator program is. But a creator program can be, to a game publisher, it can be anything from, we have a really loose, informal community of creators that we keep in touch with. And so maybe they have a Discord server for their game, and there's this particular channel where creators can talk with developers or talk amongst each other. Or it can be, hey, we have a program where once you join, we'll share updates on the game, or we'll share code so that you can have the newest battle pass or whatever it might be. And we think a powerful, holistic creator program is one in which you turn content creators into partners, where when the creator succeeds, the game succeeds, and when the game succeeds, the creator succeeds. And, you know, we're, again, very biased, but we think the core part of that is a revenue sharing opportunity, so that a creator actually has the opportunity when they drive sales of the game or within the game, they get credit for that and they get a piece of that. And so they're incentivized to really be long-term partners rather than one-time tourists. And that's really the fundamental difference, we think, between traditional influencer marketing versus a creator program. Influencer marketing is, hey, it's awareness-based. We want you to play our game for X amount of time. And then the creator, frankly, is disincentivized from coming back, versus a creator program is, how do we turn these people into long-term partners where we share in each other's success? And that's what Nexus is all about. And frankly, that's what I think will be table stakes in the future, is building these more holistic creator programs.
Yeah, agreed. It's funny. We've talked about this a little bit offline. It's a very, very similar sentiment to the folks who are trying to do the Web3 gaming thing. And I know you don't focus on Web3 games at all, right? You actually focus on traditional games, PC games, console games, and some mobile games. But the value prop is very, very similar to what these people are promising in the Web3 gaming space now, where they're saying, hey, you can own a piece of it, you're shared in our success, you're more bought in. And so, I mean, that's not a focus for you. I think we've talked before about how I think there might be a big opportunity for you there. We'll put that on the side for now, but it's interesting that this value prop is now coming up across a bunch of different go-to-market and distribution methods. And so there's probably something there. What is the problem that these creative programs are trying to solve? And like, why do publishers seek them out?
Yeah, well, I think that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, is the difference between UA versus, I don't know if you call it growth or monetization or retention or whatever the metrics that you're measuring. And creator programs and influencer marketing solve for different things. Influencer marketing, frankly, is better for UA than a creator program might be, because it's getting someone to show a player who's never seen something before a particular game. But a creator program is solving for a really specific thing. What we've found is a creator program, from the sense of building these influencers, these content creators into long-term partners, is incredibly impactful for retention, reactivation, and then moving players along the monetization curve. And it's because you basically create a feedback loop between the creator and the player, that when the content creator talks about, let's say there's new content in the game, there's a new season, a new battle pass, whatever it might be, and the creator now talks about that, and they see that feedback loop for when they talk about it, their audience then goes and buys that, and the creator gets credit. They're now incentivized to continue to do that. There's also that feedback loop for the player. And an interesting thing is, like, it seems it's either unintuitive or unexpected, the concept that a player wants to support their favorite creator in a vacuum.
That's crazy.
But like, without getting any reward. So like, we've seen creator programs be incredibly effective.
Football fans might have something to say about that, right?
But for some reason, people don't expect it for like video game streamers, like, hey, we need to give a discount, or we need to give exclusive content or additional content. But that's not true. Like, you can have a creator program where the only thing the player gets is satisfaction of supporting their favorite content creator, and it'll still be incredibly effective. And so going back to your question of like, why are publishers looking for this? First off, there's been a zeitgeist and an understanding amongst marketing teams pretty much in every game publisher, except for maybe really hyper casual, just understanding that there is value of influencers and content creators, that this is access to an audience, this is access to a tighter community, this is access to the things that they're looking to solve through leveraging content creators. And so there's like this shared conversation of, hey, we need a creator program. We want to work with creators, but not a great understanding of like, what does that mean, or what is that specifically solving for? And we're just now learning where creator programs are incredibly effective and where they're less effective. And where they are effective is in that converting free players into paid players, is in retaining your top players and like moving folks along that and increasing LTV and that sort of stuff. But a creator program, working with a creator who's made 100 videos over 2 years for the same game, they're not going to be that great at user acquisition because all the people that watch them are already playing the game or used to play the game. But that is still valuable. It's just a different sort of value.
Yeah, you said a couple of things that are interesting to touch on. I think one, you talked about the way that folks are now engaging with these creators and how important it is. And what we're seeing is even at the top of funnel, influencer marketing or things that look like influencer marketing are incredibly valuable from a user acquisition perspective. One of our most tried and true tactics, especially on channels like TikTok and Facebook and Snapchat, is make videos that look like native TikToks. Yeah. Right. And we just push a bunch of money behind them, like tens of hundreds of $1,000s, but it looks just like a native influencer campaign. And those are incredibly effective. Some of our most high performing ones.
So the company Curse that I talked about, which was where I had joined them as a startup and then grew with them, we created something called the influencer unit. And like, this is part of the genesis of why I started a company and what was working and then what the industry didn't want at the time. But we created an influencer unit, which was basically work with creators and they make the ad unit. And this can be micro-influencers, it can be large folks, it can be a recognizable face, or it's just like the native feeling of, hey, this is someone playing the game in a way that I would play it, and I'll be more interested in. And I think that's part of a creator program is you should leverage the creators that are making content for you and support them by using them in other ad units and using them in marketing. And so I think that's absolutely a thing that we've seen grow and we've seen be incredibly effective, especially on platforms like TikTok, but it should just become like a core part of the toolkit for basically any marketer.
Yeah, I totally agreed. And you're really talking about it as more of like a retention lever or like an upsell lever. Where it fits in my head in terms of the overall user acquisition games funnel, it's almost like a retargeting or re-engagement lever. Like traditionally we'd use retargeting platforms where we'd show ads to people who have either engaged in churn or engaged and not yet purchased. And this seems like a new spin on a similar mechanic, which is basically we have these people, we've paid a lot of money to get 97% of our players in who've never spent. This is a tool to get that from 97 to 92. And if it's ROI positive, if it doesn't cost too much, that can be very, very ROI positive endeavor.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about how these creator programs fit into an overall go-to-market strategy. One of the things I wanted to talk about, if there's any other thoughts there, please let me know. But also let's sort of elaborate on that and say what types of games work best for these types of programs and which ones don't and why.
Yeah. The only piece that I think is worth talking about is the difference in a creator program is performance-based, versus CPM or awareness and like what that has to do with ROAS. So like a creator program from the sense of revenue share should be a pretty straightforward conversation with any marketing team because like the sense is you only pay the creator when they actually drive sales, when they're actually driving revenue because you're giving them a piece of revenue and they don't get paid otherwise. They don't get paid based on awareness. And so like the attribution is much easier, which is frankly a thing that's I wouldn't say solved, but is much more solved in mobile than it is in PC and console.
Right.
But in PC and console, most marketing and definitely most all influence marketing is pure awareness. And there's like really little attribution that you can derive from the marketing spend that you're making.
GameSide might argue with you, but sure.
Well, they are the ones trying to solve it and they're good partners and we build creator programs together and do some fun stuff we can talk about. But I will say like the idea of the revenue share perk within a creator program is that it's pure performance based. And so your ROAS is like necessarily positive and it's day zero, right? Like there's no payback period. You're not waiting 1 week, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. Like it's when you spend dollars, you're immediately, that's part of revenue generation at the same time.
So the obvious pushback to this is, well, isn't this cannibalizing my existing revenue base? So, I mean, I have never done a sale for you, but if I was doing your sales, I would imagine that that's the thing that comes up first on every sales call. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. There's that. And then there's one other like deeper pushback that we usually get. So the first is cannibalization is like, hey, if I'm sharing revenue with someone, what if that sale would have happened otherwise? Then I'm just losing a percentage of my margin. And frankly, that's a thing that we were worried about. And our argument initially before we had sold or built any of these was, well, think of all the earned media that you're getting. You're getting additional marketing content. And that has some value, but it's like a vague, squishy value.
Right.
Now, if that was the only thing that was true, this would have been a hard business to build. But it turns out it's actually incremental, that when these creators drive sales, they're converting a significant amount of players that were purely free to play into actually paying players. And they're pushing players up the monetization track so that they're spending more than what they would have otherwise. So a few stats from programs that we've seen, 40% of players that use a creator code to make a purchase had never bought anything in the game before. And so either a bunch of those folks were acquired players into the game, but a significant amount of them were again, converted from free into pay it. Right. And then probably the bigger number is reactivation. So 15% of players that made a purchase using a creator code had churned out of the game. So they hadn't spent in at least 60 days. And their first purchase back used a creator code, which means the creator is the one that should get full attribution for reactivating that player into the game. We've found that these programs are significantly incremental and not cannibalizing.
That seems right that the creator should have some part of that initial reactivation. it does seem a little bit aggressive that you, like, what if you reactivate a player who's then like, a multi-year player? Is giving them X%, I don't know, what do you use as a placeholder for how much you pay for the creators over like another year? Do you think that's correctly valuing the value of that user to that creator?
Absolutely. Because, if they weren't going to be reactivated, you'd get nothing. But also the creator gets them to spend more. So when players are interacting with creator codes, their average spend goes higher, but also the frequency of spend goes significantly higher. And so because they get to see that piece, that again, there's a player feedback loop where they get to see that they're supporting their favorite creator and they get thanked on stream or wherever it might be, that gets them to spend more and spend more often. Basically, all of the metrics that we see is that you want as many players as possible interacting with the creator program because it's the highest return you can possibly have. Really, the challenge is not the cannibalization or the potential margin loss. The challenge is that the channel is not infinite, right? There's only so many creators and so many players that watch those creators. And so the knock on a creator program is not the margin aspect, but it's, well, how much of the total revenue pie does it touch? And that's part of the things that we're trying to solve and figure out.
Right. It's like an opportunity cost problem where it's like we could be doing something else potentially with our time and with our budgets.
It's like in every channel that you're measuring, your creator program, frankly, will be the relative highest impact for any metric or KPI on like growth and monetization. Again, not as much on UA. It'll be the best in those channels relative, like percentage wise, but the absolute numbers won't be that high. Some of the games that we're in, it touches 1.5 or 2% of players, which is great because that's pure incremental and is driving real value, but it's not the biggest channel that they have that's driving monetization.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I want to dive more into the business of how should someone evaluate this in a second, but I want to take a pause and talk about who is this a good fit for first. So there are hundreds of thousands of games, millions, like there's a lot of games out there. Which segment should be focusing on this?
Well, yeah, the beginning of that question gets to like why creator programs, like what is the difference between today and 20 years ago is like, well, there's so many games today that discovery and distribution is more important than it's ever been. But which games is it a fit for? I can only tell you definitively what I know it's a great fit for, and then I can speculate what I think might be a good fit because our product is like, a year and change old. And so we've only been in a handful of games and learned, a certain amount of data. What I know it's an incredible fit for are live service games. So games that are continuously updated, that have some sort of in-game monetization or in-game currency with a meaningful player base. So we measure that at like 100,000 DAUs, but it does depend on platform. It can be less for like VR, which 100,000 DAUs is gigantic versus mobile, which
all of people.
Exactly. And then it's also important that there is a creator base, and where the line that we put to basically guarantee value is that there's at least a half dozen content creators. So at least 6 individual people that one of their main games, so at least 30% of the content they make is for the specific game. And if those things are true, then they should absolutely have a creator program, and day one, it'll be really valuable. And where particularly it's valuable is if the game's been out for a while and they're either trying to retain revenue or they're slowly losing revenue, then like this is frankly the best option they can have to think about retention and reactivation of their player base. What I speculate it would be good for is any game that is more core, because the more core a game is, it'll make sense to have a creator playing it because people will watch them to like get information of how to play or how to play better or how to succeed. Any of the games that are more naturally comfortable for a creator to play. And so those are generally going to be multiplayer. Generally, they're going to be some sort of competitive. And again, generally, they're going to be more core.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. That's good context. So let's talk, this is a business podcast. Let's talk about the business of this. Let's break down the baseline economics of how people think about this generally and how you guys think about this. And that's both in terms of how much companies should invest in these programs and then how much creators are getting and sort of what those splits are. You don't need to give away any secret sauce, but just sort of high level, how do the unit economics of this bake out?
Yeah, I'll give the brief history. So frankly, the reason like why we exist is we're really inspired by what Upptic did with Fortnite. They had a supported creator program for Fortnite Battle Royale, which was fundamentally creator would go and get a code, which was their name. So it'd be code Xander, for example. And then you'd go tell your audience, hey, when you're buying stuff inside of Fortnite, use code Xander and I get a piece of it. And the way that their program worked and still works today, it was a flat revenue share for essentially all the creators. They had some promotional activities early on, but essentially every creator would get the same amount. And it was the same for every SKU, for every creator, for every time. And those are important dynamics to think about. And that percentage was 5%. So a creator would get 5%. Now, Fortnite was a big enough game that there were creators that made $500,000, $1 million a month off of their creator program. And so if you multiply that by 20, that's the amount of revenue they were driving a given month for the game. And so it was a really, really, really powerful tool. And that 5% was enough because it was the biggest game in the world. It was, having the most sales every given month. So there's been a few other really large publishers that have instituted creator programs. Supercell has a really successful one. Call of Duty Warzone has a successful creator program. Roblox has an interesting take. It's like a little bit of a different creator program, but that's sort of it, because the challenges of building a creator program are significant. You need to engineer the piece, you need to have the dashboarding, you need to have the financial side of how do you pay out creators, how do you handle taxes, all that sort of stuff. So that's some of the history. And so that's at the stage of the expectations of what should a revenue share perk be within a creator program. It should be 5%, and it should be true for all creators, for all SKUs, for all time. We found that that's actually not as effective as it can be. And you want to create a dynamic revenue share where the revenue share should be different for different creators. It doesn't necessarily have to be because the creators are larger or smaller and that determines what they get, but it could be the amount of content they make for your game, the sort of creator they are they a better fit, someone that you're really looking for, whatever it might be. You want to be able to offer creators different tiers of revenue share, but also different SKUs. For example, if you have a battle pass or a first-time monetization bundle, you want to offer a ton of revenue share for those specific SKUs, because when you get a player to purchase those, they become a better player. Like the second someone buys those things, they have a much higher LTV than other SKUs. And also, it's really helpful to offer change revenue share by time. So if you launch a new season, you want all the creators to reactivate. We also want all the players to reactivate. And so offer 10% more revenue share for that period. So that's a lot of words. We have a bunch of best practices and recommendations and learnings, but in general, we see really successful programs where the average revenue share is closer to 15%.
Interesting.
And what we found...
Unintuitive, but interesting.
What we found is actually the ROAS is so high for these sort of things that you can share 45, 50% and you're still ROI positive, even after platform fees and all the other sort of stuff. And so what we see today is basically having a creator program is a significant competitive advantage. But in 3 to 4 years, it'll be table stakes. Every live service game will have to have a creator program, and they're going to be competing on these sort of vectors. It's not just going to be revenue share. There's going to be other perks of activations and promotions and sort of things. But this thinking about dynamic revenue share is going to become more and more important. And so to your question of like, where should these teams invest? It is in that revenue share piece, like that is really important, but it's also investing in programs where, for example, if players buy something through a creator program, the creator gets a voice pack immortalized in game, or you can get a specific creator skin or whatever it might be. Those are really valuable tools and levers for marketing teams to pull as well.
Again, it sounds a lot like the stuff that they are doing Web3, which is kind of interesting. But you're attacking this from a totally different angle. And I know that's going to offend you and your team. But
it doesn't offend me. That's not my world. I don't know.
Yeah. It's a lot of the same themes, which is interesting, right? There seems to be a cultural zeitgeist that's consolidating around these ideas. And it's not crazy to think. I mean, I recently ran into Mr. Beast. I know he existed forever, but I recently, over a year ago, I was like, what the fuck is this? And I started watching all his videos and I became obsessed. Not because I care about it, but I'm like, if you want to understand how marketing works for the next 10 years, watch every Mr. Beast video. That is literally where marketing is going. And so it makes sense in that context.
It's a good example. 2 weeks ago, one of the Paul brothers, I'm pretty sure it was one of the Paul brothers, did a in-game promotion for a tower defense game that was successful, but wasn't incredibly successful. And over that week, it was by far the most successful tower defense, most successful strategy game. And it's because they had shared, I think it was a Rush Royale, but they did basically a one-time revenue share thing with a giant content creator. It was enormously successful. And so we might see the ultra mega super creators like a Mr. Beast. There's been all these conversations of creators starting their own products. OTK, for example, is starting their own publishing arm, and there's all these other folks starting their own publishing. And this is a core piece of it, is the belief that when creators are so incredibly valuable for a game, well, if they're delivering so much value, how do you create the right system so that they can also derive and extract value and then continue to be good partners? And I think this sort of revenue share piece is a critical component of that.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And it's scary to traditional distributors of games like myself and team here, but I think we're going to be okay because we're adapting. Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit about build versus buy. So talk a little bit about the unit economics of, I'm a big corporation or even a medium or small size corporation. I want to create a program. There's some cost point at which it probably makes sense for me to do it internally. If I'm really small, it probably doesn't. Can you talk a little bit about how a GM or someone who's in charge of revenue at a games company should think about doing this internally versus hiring someone like Nexus to do it all?
Yeah, as always, but specifically here, I'm going to caveat, this is my opinion. Do whatever you think makes most sense. But first, I'll actually talk about influencer marketing in a more traditional sense, which is basically getting influencers to play your game and you give them some amount of money to do so. Usually it's either paid per hour or paid per content. So for the really big folks, it might be like $20,000 an hour to stream your game or $50,000 a video to put it on YouTube.
Right.
I think influencer marketing is a really great awareness tool. Adam at GameSite might disagree, but not a particularly great conversion tool.
Sure.
And so where I think you should spend on influencer marketing is at the edges. Either you have a gigantic budget and then you should really think about influencer marketing as a pure awareness tool and as a meta influencer tool, meaning like other influencers watch influencers and that's what keys them into what games to play. Or you spend nothing and you go pure organic, where you reach out directly to creators and you say, hey, here's a key, try out the game.
Right.
But anything in the middle, I wouldn't recommend. And so if you don't have a humongous budget, influencer marketing might not be the thing to think about. It might not be at least the most effective channel. Creator programs are interesting because where it is today is if you're doing it first party, it's really expensive, both in time and dollars. There's really three pieces of what a like creator program looks like. The first piece, we'll talk about the technical side. So it's, well, how does the player actually decide which creator they're supporting and what is like the attribution guts internal to like the logistics of your game so that you can attribute when a player is supporting a creator, you can give the creator credit for that. And part of that is also dashboarding. So how does the creator know that that sale happened and how do you as the game understand that that happened? None of that is like proprietary algorithms. It's not incredibly challenging work to do, but it is a team of engineers 6 to 18 months and it has nothing to do with building the game.
Right.
Really the most effort and the reason why people end up working with folks like us is on the financial side, which is, okay, let's say you have 50 creators in your creator program and they all generated different amounts of revenue and they're all owed different amounts of revenue. Well, then you have to pay them all out. And that is not a thing any finance team wants to do. You could go talk to the biggest publishers in the world and you say, hey, we have 50 more contractors every month. You have to pay different amounts and they're not going to be happy with you.
Right.
And then at the end of the year, you got to pay taxes for them and you got to help them figure out the taxes and do 1099s and W-9s and all that sort of stuff. And that's a challenge in and of itself too. And so that's usually the biggest headache that someone like us solves for. But that's actually only thinking of the first party side from the publisher perspective. Mm-hmm. You should also think about it from the creator perspective. And a creator does not want to have a dozen different first party creator programs. Because what that means is really two things. One, their wallet, this portion of their income is across all these other places they have to keep track of and think of and go to. And what if someone was a month late? They have to go push them over there to do. And that's not a thing that they're excited about. But also the creator code is they're probably not going to get the same exact creator code in every game. Maybe it'll be like Xander Fortnite or Xander FN for one game, but Xander MC for Minecraft. And that'd be really annoying to your audience to have to use a different code and you'd have to tell them to use a different code. And so basically the creators are going to want to be part of a third party as well. And so those have been our advantages. I think the places where it makes sense to build yourself is if you need to have a really, really tight control over the creators and over your IP, where you don't want them to play any competitive games, for example. So like if you have a big shooter and you don't want any of the creators in your program to be playing another shooter, well, you're going to have to contract them to do so and pay them to do so.
Right.
And so you might as well build your own program and manage it that way. If you're the type of publisher that can afford to have an evergreen influencer team, because you're going to need people that are actually managing these creators and doing new activations and promotions and working with them. But if you can afford to have your evergreen influencer team, maybe it does make sense to go first party. Otherwise, it might make sense to go third party. The challenge, of course, is like there's not a lot of platforms that are building ad hoc creator programs. And there's not really like a Unity style thing that you can just plug and play. And
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. All right. Well, that's a lot of context about how we implement this now. What's the pros and what's the cons and, what's the business case. For our last sort of arc of this, just want to open the aperture a little bit and talk a little bit about the future. I mean, we've sort of hit on this, but I just want to give you a chance to speak to this because I think it's kind of interesting. If you take the long horizon, how do you expect games to evolve over the next, call it 3 to 5 years? And then how do influencers and creators fit into that overall evolution of games?
I have strong opinions here that, might be contrarian. One, I think platform won't matter in the future.
Interesting.
I think mobile, console, and PC are almost the same thing in terms of like capabilities and will be the same thing sometime soon. And so we've seen games go multi-platform, but I think that'll be the norm rather than the exception. Maybe that's not super contrarian to say today, but it is like, it's hard. It's hard to have your game be a multiplayer game, be cross-platform on all different mobile and console and PC.
Yeah, well, the user experience for like a mobile device versus a console, it's pretty distinct, right? And so the game,
and even like the DevOps side of it, of like how do you get the server experience to be the same? Frankly, every time you do it, you have to get PlayStation and Xbox to be nice to each other and like let you do it. But it will become, I think, more natural, and frankly, it'll be the expected norm. And I think if that's true, then that means yet again distribution actually becomes commoditized and discovery is important. So like that's been more and more true, where like the reason that Steam, for example, was really successful is distribution was hard. How do you actually get your exe file of your game into someone's computer was really tough. And it was bandwidth challenges and it was technologically tough. And it was like not an easy thing to do. And Steam solved for a lot of that. And they became the de facto both distribution and discovery engine. And so when you talk about, you scroll through Steam and you see Steam reviews in order to see about games, that has been true for the past handful of years, but I think it'll become less and less true because distribution is an easier thing to do. Now you can be a startup and you can have your own launcher, and it's not prohibitively challenging for people to come in and actually download your game and get updates and whatever it might be. And there's so many games being developed every single week because the engines are now free when they used to be proprietary. And tools are better, and you can make BattleBit with 4 people. It can have millions of players. I think that discovery becomes the tough part. And I think discovery is trending towards, well, how do people learn about games? Frankly, the number one place that people learn about games is actually your friend group. And this is why I think the ultimate opportunity of Discord is commerce, but they tried that and they didn't love it. And so they're not doing it. But I think it's still an opportunity, and maybe they will in the future.
They get a huge locked in audience. So yeah.
And a bunch of money. And I think the number 2 way that people learn about games is from your like pseudo friend group, from your parasocial friend relationships, which are the influencers that you follow and watch.
Media influencers, yeah.
Especially streamers, because these are people that you watch many hours a week and you're watching them in so many facets of their life that it feels like you know them. I don't know if you watch streams, but if you watch a little bit and you've ever then met any of those people in real life, it's really weird. There's this like dissonance of, I feel like I know you so well and you have no idea who the heck I am. This is really common for me because we work with so many creators that like I have to intentionally and consciously catch myself of, hey, this person's never met me. Don't be weird. Don't like know all the things about their life. But because of that feeling, the recommendations that those folks make and the games that they play have such a big impact on the sort of games that you as the viewer end up playing and watching. And so I think that'll only be continuing to be true. So your question is like, what does the future look like? I think distribution is going to be more and more commoditized, where it's easy to put your game in anyone's device. I think those devices won't really matter. Whatever you enjoy using, whether that's a controller, a keyboard, or a phone, you'll be able to play any game that you want. And so I think the thing that will matter and the thing that will unlock the successful games is purely discovery and how people successfully, innovatively, and creatively leverage go-to-market. There's some other thoughts there, but like that's what I think the future could look like.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, for Steam, because they've transferred from distribution to discovery for me, they're in a pretty good place for my PC consumption. When I think about mobile, I mean, the App Store is just atrocious. It's like embarrassing how bad it is. Like Apple should be ashamed of themselves. They have so much information about me, and the recommendations are horrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
That's an interesting microcosm of something for the future is Apple takes a 30% tax, and Epic has been battling that. And there's now sort of a legal way that like if you send someone out of app, you don't have to pay that tax.
Which you can kind of do in some situations. It's fraying. It's fraying.
And the question is, well, okay, but that's actually friction, right? How do we get someone to leave the game in order to go and buy something? And so you need some way that can surmount that friction. And frankly, influencers are like the best to do it because they provide a cohesive message of, hey, go to this specific place in order to make this purchase. And so I think influencers can actually be particularly powerful for that one-off weird thing that people are trying to do to gain additional margin as well.
Yeah, one thing I really like about Epic is they're sort of putting their money where their mouth is. Their store, I can't remember what the fee is, but it's the cheapest, right? They've undercut Steam, and like they're really like serious about pushing down the cost of distribution. So it makes a lot of sense. Well, Justin, this is really interesting. I'm really glad we had a chance to talk about this. Like I said, it's a little bit different than what we normally talk about with our audience. It's a little bit deeper funnel, but it's important, I think, for games growth, especially as we understand where games are evolving in the future. So really appreciate having you here. If someone wants to get a hold of you or learn more about Nexus, where can they do that?
My email is justin@nexus.gg. My Twitter is terrible. It's Justin__Sachs, which is my last name, which is just a miserable place, but you can probably Google me and find it. But I'm happy to talk with anyone, whether it's about creators or games or the challenges that are esports or whatever it might be.
Awesome. Well, appreciate having you here. I'm going to sign off now, and Warren usually signs off, so I've never done this before, and they'll see how I do. This podcast is brought to you by the team here at Upptic. At Upptic, we do everything we can to help games grow. We have a growth services team, which provides user acquisition, data analytics, and creative development for your growing games. If you need help either early stage, if you want to do soft launch, or if you're a scaled game, hit us up. We also have a awesome platform, which helps with analytics capabilities, as well as a creative workflow tool and much more. If you're interested in learning more, please visit us at upptic.com. That's upptic.com. Talk soon.